us find peace. Let us find love.
Well, join me as we affirm. I embrace change. My life is enlivened and enriched by a new perspective. Let's just say that first piece first, because I know if you're like me, that's a hard affirmation. It's real easy to say. I embrace change. Whew. You can do the rest if you want to, but that first one I have to say that a lot. I have to share that when I drove up into the parking lot, first of all, for about 10 years of speaking and being a minister, I have, why I don't know, but I listened to old-time gospel music. And my wife, who was raised as a Southern Baptist and who often struggles and pushes and pulls and fusses and cusses about her Southern Baptist upbringing, except when it comes to casseroles. Casseroles, that works. But I always listen to that old music, and that old music brings her to a place, and brings her to a place that reminds her of her first experience of God. Not the experience of all that fussing and cussing, not the experience of people who told you you were bad, told you there was something wrong with you, but that experience of God. And most of us got that somewhere along the time when we went to some other churches, and then we lost it. And then we showed up here. And by the time we show up here, we may not even say God. We may say universe. We may say spirit. We may say 100 other things. But what we're really talking about is God. And in our old-time unity folk, just like the old-time folks talking about going to the river and pray. By the way, the last song I heard in the parking lot, and I stayed in the car, was Sweet Honey in the Rock singing that song. I didn't know I didn't have to sit in my car. I could have just come in here and waited. It would have been, holy cow. So anyway, Anna called me and said, would you talk? And I said, sure. And I said, what's your theme? And she said, change. And I said, oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. And especially for me, because as I shared the last time I was here, going through a few changes. You know, I made a decision to retire and to leave the church that I had led for 5 years in Houston and to move to San Antonio. And when that first decision, I first made that decision, that first Sunday was like, oh boy, what do I do now? You know, and then the next Sunday and the next Sunday, but I was busy. Had to get my house ready to sell in Houston, and then I would drive up to San Antonio to supervise the building of my new home, and there was a lot of things to do. And then my brother-in-law was diagnosed with 2 different kinds of cancer, and so I became his chauffeur and his medical advocate, and so a lot of things were happening. But at around 6 months, things started slowing down, you know. We just go to bi-weekly lab appointments, and I let the dogs out, let the dogs in, I let the dogs out, I let the dogs in, and I say, wow, this is my life, huh? And so I responded in the way that I usually do. What am I supposed to do next? And that's a good question to ask. Well, the way I've always done that in the past is, what is my next job? What is the next certificate I'm going to get, or the license that I'm going to get? And I realized that I was going to get a PhD in spirituality, a Christian spirituality thing, and I said, okay, I'm 68, I'll get through 73, $50,000 later, all I can be is Dr. Don, or Reverend Dr. Don for $50,000. And I said, I'm not real sure with, a decade and a half or 2 decades left around here, I'm going to get any cost benefit out of that. Maybe I could get smart in another way. And my wife said, that would be really good. That would be really good. She would like to do something more than work, although she does do that, and I'm very grateful for that. But one of the biggest things that struck me, and this was what I had talked to Reverend Anna about, is I don't have a business card. I have had a business card since 1977. And that was because when I was an Army pilot, we didn't have business cards. But everything after that, I had a business card. People would say, what do you do? And I'd say, here, read it. And the titles got more impressive to me and those kinds of things on those business cards. And then I said, who am I? What am I going to be? What do I do? And the reason I read that idea about darkness is because it can be kind of dark when you say, what am I? I've been, not really as a Unity minister, but my brother-in-law, when he retired from being a Methodist minister, he said, I'm hanging up my sin fighting suit and just going to relax. And I said, oh my God, we don't believe in sin and I don't have a sin fighting suit. What do I do? Golly, I was in trouble. And so so I'm just stuck. Well, not really, because my wife reminded me, she said, why don't you go listen to some of your old sermons? And I said, I don't think so. Because then I would not have an excuse to mope around the house. Let the dogs in, let the dogs out. I would not have that excuse. And so I went into some dark places. I went into those places and said, what am I? Who am I? And I realized that it's not an uncommon thing. As I sit and whine and cry to other people, anybody that would listen to me in the HEB line or wherever I happen to be, I realize that people go through this all the time. Young couples have children. And I don't know if you guys remember that. I do remember what that was like. A big change, a big loss, actually. Something new came into your life, but a whole lot of things got lost, sleep and other things. So every time these things happen to us in this transition, in this change, we say, I embrace change. Boy, that's a great affirmation, but it really is a difficult spot to go to, especially if you choose to deal with it simply as an affirmation. You can look at your face in the mirror day after day after day and say, I embrace change, I embrace change, I embrace change. And ain't nothing gonna happen except you don't have to read it off the card anymore. Because what happens to you is you're simply trying to whistle your way past that graveyard rather than recognizing that the graveyard is there. When we're sick, when my brother-in-law found out he had cancer, he had to come face to face with the idea that he might die. Now, here in the U.S. or here in the West, we avoid that with every ounce of our being, don't we? We don't want to hear that. We don't want to talk about death. And that's the ultimate transition. That's the ultimate change that we have to embrace. Don't worry, I'm not going to go way down there because I know that'd be sad. Nobody will want to talk to me in the fellowship hall. So we're going to talk about something else. Emily Cady had some ideas about this. And it actually comes in her book, Lessons in Truth. And it comes from the chapter on faith. I'm going to read this. She said, when the Nazarene, who had recognized the unchangeable fact that the supply of every want awaited in the unseen, the demand for it, said, If ye ask, you receive. It was simply a statement of an unalterable truth. He had learned that asking is desire expressed. She goes on to say, desire in the heart is always God tapping at the door of your consciousness with his infinite supply, a supply which is forever useless unless there be a demand for it. So think about that. When I was wandering around feeling sorry for myself, what was going on? God is tapping. God is tapping. And rather than getting the answer from God, I got the answer from here. I got the answer from my head. Get a PhD. Write a check for $50,000. That's going to be the answer to all this crap that's floating around inside of your life. That's what my head said. God's tapping. That's what all this is. All this stuff is God saying, listen, listen. But instead of listening, I was providing the answers. Jesus said, ask. Ask makes us put the desire out into the world. He told us in Mark, we don't have to ask. God already knows. But who's got to know? I got to know. I got to know. So what I realized after some long months, what came to my mind was that I needed to be quiet and listen, not just to the tapping, but to the answer. I'm listening for the fulfillment of the desire that's out there. Notice Emily said desire, not need. Because a need is a lack. If I needed a business card, I'm expressing a lack in some fashion. And God doesn't do lack. God does desire. God does desire. Jim Rosemergy said something interesting, and I'm going to paraphrase it. Well, no. He said, God is always doing what God does. And my paraphrase is God is Godding all the time. And it doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't matter what I ask. God's doing this thing all the time. This cause, this single cause of this universe is doing God stuff all the time. I got to notice. I got to take the opportunity to notice. So when we look at that change, like the young couple who suddenly has a child, even though they planned on the child or didn't plan on the child, whatever's going on, they've got this wonderful opportunity. And they can't just affirm themselves out of that. They open themselves to the new life. The new life that's right out here always, because God's doing this thing no matter what. So the invitation from our Celtic ancestry, the invitation that we have is to step across that threshold. Now, in the past, when I came up to a threshold of change, new job, or new opportunity, or the end of a marriage, and then moving forward into whatever's coming next, there is that threshold. But instead, what I did is I'm standing over here, and I have a threshold to walk through. I just walked past that threshold and got married again. You see, rather than stepping into that darkness, in faith, because it's the tapping's going on. Don, you want to be in relationship. So the last time I got divorced, I stepped into that darkness. I stepped into that space They said, holy crap, there's no relationship here. It's just me. And then I said, oh yeah, I've been to Unity for a little bit. Then I remember there's other relationships. Then I began to have that relationship with my true self, or at least what I understand that true self to be. And in that darkness, I realized what Vera Dawson-Tate says about Emily Cady's chapter. She said, faith is the flashlight. We walk into the darkness, but our faith provides the illumination. And our mind is the foreperson, the foreman, the boss that keeps us moving into that direction that we need to go. And when we listen to what Jan said, she said, when everything is gone, every rhythm of your life has changed. She says, let what comes, come. Let the glass be filled. She doesn't say go out and find a well. She said, wait, and God will fill the glass. Now, God may tell you where the well is. There may be another message from God about that. But the filled glass comes from God and not from me deciding to write the check for whatever fills the glass. It is moving into that mystery. The past couple of months I've been hanging out with some Catholic friends who, by the way, talk that one of the greatest lines I heard. I'm taking a class in the theology of a man named Jean Vanier. And Vanier was a Catholic layperson who wrote a lot of books. One of his greatest books, in my mind, is Becoming Human. And in the idea of becoming fully human, he tells his story about living with people who have intellectual difficulties. And how coming to love people who can't love you back in the way you want to be loved back, but being loved in the way they can love. How doing that made him more fully human and more fully an intellectual human than he had ever been in the past. And he said, what we need to do is not live a Christian life. Don't live a Christian life. And I'll tell you, don't live a unity life. I'm never coming back here. Because what he said was, live the Christ life. And he said this as a Catholic lay theologian, if we could do that. He said, live life from the Christ within. Not according to the rules. And I know you may think unity doesn't have rules, but we do. We do have rules. Live not according to the rules. Live according to the Christ. The Christ within, the Christ you are. And when you hear the tapping, it's a call to God, not a call to something else. It's always, always, always a call to God. Listen to the call. And so it is. Amen.